Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Wellness Dojo podcast, where we bring real solutions to real health and wellness problems. In today's episode, surviving stress and finding success. I came up with that rhyme myself. So really, we're talking about how to recognize stress, being aware of the effect that it has on your body and on your mental health, and then some strategies to help manage and mitigate it. We hope you find some value from this episode. Here we go.
All right. We're here.
Again.
We're here again. Just ready to have some fun, be goofy, do some podcasting.
And then talk about stress.
I was going to say, talk about stress. Are you stressed today?
No, I purposefully tried to have a stress-free morning.
Perfect.
Yeah, get that stuff away from me.
Yeah, all my stress went to school this morning. So no, I'm just kidding. I love my kids.
Yeah.
I love my kids. I love my kids. I love my kids.
Say the mantra.
We're going to play another game to start off today, hey?
All right, let's play a game to start episode 4.
So you want to explain this game? You kind of told me about this game, so I'm fresh and I'm ready to make myself look a little silly here at the beginning.
Okay, so the point of this game is to both kind of, the other person goes in blind. So it's called 1 minute. So I give you a topic that I'm pretty sure you know very little about. Awesome. And then you fake it till you make it with an explanation. You sell it to me. All right. Okay. All right. So I want you for 1 minute to tell me about rocket science.
Rocket science. This is hilarious. One of my best friends in the world, almost went to school for rocket science. So it's if I could call in a friend, that would be great. So shout out to Kyle, my friend. I know my name's Kyle too, but my childhood best friend. So rocket science. Cool. That's what I have to talk about. Mm-hmm. Anything about rocket science?
Yeah, tell me all about it.
All right. My minute starts now?
Starts now.
Okay, rocket science, you guys. Rocket science is a really, really important thing that we need to know more about in society. It's something that, when it's not just about rocket ships either,
Tell me more.
It's not just about rocket ships. It's about the science of rocket ships.
Yes. Okay.
No,
you have 25 more seconds.
Yeah. No, rocket science it really isn't just about rocket ships. Rocket science is about learning about what the future of this world looks like. It's about.
Can you get more specific?
It's about, rocket science is about, tears in my eyes.
One out of 5 stars. Would not recommend.
Oh man. Okay. Rocket science is about learning about the earth. It's about learning about what we need on this earth. It's about renewable resources. It's really about what that future holds for us. It's about how do we take what we have here? How do we manipulate that into other planets, other resources?
Oh, yeah.
And it is also actually a little bit about...
Your minute is up, unless you have one more statement.
Yeah, I was just going to say it is a little bit about rocket ships, too.
Oh, okay.
All right.
We're off to a roaring start. Okay.
Okay. All right, you ready for yours?
Oh, I don't think so.
All right.
But of course, yes.
I would love, Dr. Riley, for you to tell our listeners just a little bit about how spiders have sex.
Oh, see, that's very interesting. It all starts with the courtship, and they call it an octoship because they have 8 legs. And you would be wrong to think that it was some crazy kind of rocket ship with 8 legs, but actually octoship is what they call spider courtship. And so what happens is they first use their front 2 legs, very much like humans. Kind of, they do this yoo-hoo. And that's the first step. And then with their middle arms, they kind of come across and give their bicep flex. And then the other one's like, ooh. And then with, I don't know, with their rear legs, then they like start jumping and showing their sexual prowess. And then, I mean, at that point, the other spider, just they can't resist, and then it just happens. And when it happens, it's just this really incredible smashing together of insect bodies. I mean, it's very violent because they're bugs, but you can also tell there's a lot of love. And I think my minute is up.
Oh, I hope so.
Okay.
That was.
See, this is what you get when you don't prepare and you just run into it full steam. This is what you get. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
All right.
Get rid of all the tears in my eyes now. All right. I don't know how we take the leap from that to a serious talk on stress, but we're gonna attempt it anyways.
Yeah, I think it's seamless because we're talking about how to manage stress, and
yes,
one of the ways is to, find things that make you happy and find joy. And anytime you laugh, like it really does, it spikes up some good neurochemicals and it makes you feel a lot better, So yes,
You're right.
Yes,
You're right.
seamless transition.
Seamless transition. Spider sex to manage stress.
That's right.
All right, man. Well, let's give the people what they actually came for here. Let's give some valuable content here on this subject. So let's first talk about stress. What is stress? Just even in the most basic form, and then even to a more complex form. Like, what really is stress?
Well, there's a lot of ways to look at it. I would say in the short term, if you're really looking to just boil it down to something, it's like adrenaline and cortisol flowing through your bloodstream. That's a big part of what stress is. And then over time, that can wreak havoc on your body. But, it's more than just the physical. Like stress can be, it can also be having automatic negative thoughts for most of your life. And that's almost like this low-grade stress where you're at odds with your external environment constantly. Maybe you've been through a lot of trauma and you haven't dealt with it. That's a type of stress that can stay with you. Holding very serious grudges. So there's going to be the type of stress that it's obvious. It's right in front of your face, and we'll talk about some of the biggest life stressors, that have been outlined recently. But then there's also this like the trickier, sneakier kind of stress, which is almost like thought-based, I would say. It started with something, maybe like a trauma, but now it continues. Yeah. Continues as thought-based.
Yeah, so like basically for those of you who are listening, you might be trying to think of like, okay, well, what is what for me and in my situation, right? So maybe some examples of that would be, something that's more obvious to you might be like having a bad day. Like something happens early in your morning, you almost get into a car accident, and you're like, whoa, that was stressful, right? That's kind of like an immediate thing that we obviously recognize as stress. But then there might be something where, like you said, like negative thoughts, right? Where maybe it's like every day you wake up, you look in the mirror and you're not happy with what you're seeing, right? And you this starts to bring upon like negative self-talk, negative self-image, that type of thing. That's something that over time, that's going to be causing you a lot of ongoing stress. Mm-hmm. Am I correct with that?
Yep.
So another thing that I try to highlight to people when we're talking about like what is stress is that, to us, stress feels different. Like to me and you, we might look at it a little bit different, but to everybody,
how you perceive it,
right?
Process
like
it.
People will process it as like, okay, this is emotional stress, this is physical stress. But really, when you get down to it, to your body, to your actual nervous system, like stress is stress.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. The stress is your fight or flight that, relaxed, like your nervous system is either spiked or it's relaxed. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of to your body. That's what stress is. And that's going to be important later on when we talk about how to manage it as well.
Yeah. It's like a type of stress is it's like a tension. Mm-hmm. It's like a mental, emotional, and physical tension that you just carry with yourself. And I think it can also get kind of dangerous when people stop even really realizing what it is and that it's going on, and you almost just kind of, you get used to it without dealing with it. And then, so this is, Dr. Gabor Mate, his theory about stress and chronic illness is that ongoing stress, like unresolved stress, whether it be trauma or whether it be you're just somebody that never stands up for yourself, you're always a yes person, like 20-30 years of that, and then suddenly somebody gets some sort of an unexplained autoimmune condition. His argument is that he believes that in many cases it's because of chronic stress, and that's what is it's like you're denying your body and your mental emotional state for so long that then the body kind of does this, it inverts and kind of does this flip and starts attacking on itself. So it's kind of a radical theory, but we know the effects of stress that it has on the physical body. So it's really not that far of a leap. But I think stress, like you said, you don't want to look at it as something like, oh, I had something that happened in the past maybe, but it's kind of in the past and that's not really stressing me out anymore because I don't feel it.
Yeah.
Be very careful of things that, even though they happened in the past, that, you know, if they're unresolved, they're probably having some sort of an effect on you.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know how those things can linger, right? But it's easy. It's just easier. Sometimes it feels easier to just push those things aside and to make those things a part of your past instead of a part of your present, right? But like we all know, like there's certain things, you have that fight with a family member or something, and then every time you see them post on Facebook or something, it brings up that emotion again. It brings up that little bit of stress again. And so it's important that we look at those things and that we deal with those things, right? Which again is something that we can talk about a little bit more when we're looking at how do we actually manage this thing. But you know, you kind of touched on how stress affects your body. I think we all recognize that, you know, I see this with massage therapy a lot. I'm sure you see it, you know, with acupuncture and with a lot of different things, but you actually see physical stress in the body. People say, oh, I had a stressful week, and you can feel that in their shoulders, right? Oh, I had a stressful week. Oh, all of a sudden my hip is acting up again, right? Like things like that. Those are things that I think we recognize maybe a little bit more on the surface. Is there anything else, like other ways that you find that stress like actually physically affects the body?
Yeah. Oh yeah. In lots of different ways. It can affect your sleep-wake cycles, which then of course has a lot of snowballing effects down the line on other things. So if we just start there, like that can cause this kind of this positive feedback loop where, so you're not getting great sleep because you're thinking about things maybe at night, or maybe you're just generally wound up and worried. Then the mind starts revving up at 4 or 5 a.m. thinking about these problems still. And then all throughout the day, you're very irritable and stressed, quote unquote, because you haven't had a great sleep for a while. And then, it just kind of feeds into itself. So sleep-wake cycles for sure, energy as well, obviously, if your sleep-wake cycle's off, your energy's low, but some people sleep for 10 hours a day and still say they have no energy. So that's likely the effect of stress, and, you know, obviously mental health, can be a depression picture and things like that. These things swim into each other, right? So we talked about sleep, we talked about energy. Digestion is another big one. So maybe that's something we can jump into, because I know we got some common ground there with working with clients and patients. So like eating habits, a little bit, which is more on your end, and then I'd say like the digestive process itself that I see maybe a little bit more on mine. But like how do you see it affecting maybe eating habits? Motivation, I guess, is in there too, like motivating to stay on track. Yeah,
I think so. Like that's probably the number one thing that I see with people who are struggling with their eating habits is like stress, like looking at stress, like, well, you know, what I really do and what I you know, take a lot of pride in is helping people kind of get to the surface, or not the surface, sorry, beneath the surface of like what's really going on. Like, okay, obviously it's frustrating for you that you are eating these foods, because it makes people often feel like people who are trying to lose weight and then are, binging at night. Well, that doesn't make them feel good when they're done binging. So it's looking at like, how do I feel before? How do I feel during? How do I feel after? And almost always when we look at how did I feel before, what kind of things were happening that day before, it's usually from a stressful situation. And when it's not, when it's kind of more of something that, like when you're looking more at like a more disordered style, like type of eating, then oftentimes it's what we talked about before, where we're looking at, deeper things that are continuing to cause stress, but they haven't been dealt with yet. And so we're dealing with it in a more immediate form, right? And that could be pressure from your job. That could be, tension in your family. That could be a pandemic that seems to be just looming over us. Like it could be a lot of different things. And it's looking at like, okay, well, how do we manage that stress in order to start to change this habit of eating, right? And I'm sure you could kind of comment on like what then starts to happen, like with something like binging on chips at the end of the night and stuff, like that does have an effect. People wake up and their guts hurt and like these types of things, like that has an effect on that as well. And like you said, all these things kind of swim into each other, right? It's like the lack of sleep, and then you have more impulsive eating that causes more stress. And it's like this, like really just like horrible cycle that is so hard to get off for a lot of people.
Yeah. No, you're totally right about the effect on your eating cycles. And I did run across a study. I think they were doing it on, I think it was on university students, because they were testing like people that were staying up late and their food choices. And overwhelmingly, the later people were staying up, and like whether you're watching TV or doing homework, which maybe they were doing homework, maybe they weren't, but you go to the quick burning carbs and the quick sugar. And they're finding if there's any meals being had after midnight or after 11 p.m. or something like that, it's not good news, right? It's like withdrawing money at 3 a.m. You're not doing that for anything positive. Old Chris Rock joke. Yeah. Yes. So okay. So where do we want to go from here?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about like the physical side of stress, how that affects, but another thing that I think is important for people to understand as well is the impact that stress maybe has on our habits, right? Like we kind of talked about eating habits, that type of thing, but there's also other habits. And I mean, you are quite experienced in dealing with like addiction and those types of things too, right? And I know, maybe it's probably not the same thing. You could talk more about that than I could. But when I look at people, like there are like addictions to food and stuff like that. And oftentimes those addictions, I know addiction might be a bit of a gray line that crossing over in this discussion, but there's triggers, there's stressors that do trigger behaviors like that. And as like the more those behaviors continue, the more we kind of like, this like
you almost reinforce it every time.
You reinforce it, and like the way habits work, the studies have shown that like it really does like create and engrave, almost like if you were carving in a new pathway in the brain. There's a reason why habits are difficult to stop. There's a habit that maybe you want to stop and you just find like I'm having such a hard time stopping it. Well, it might be it could come down to that trigger. And dealing with that trigger, that stressor that might be, really contributing to that habit. But the reason it's hard is because we really are carving a new pathway into the brain. And the more that pathway gets carved, the harder it is to then, to come off of it and create a new one.
Yeah, it's true. And that's really the only way to come off of it and create a new one, is you have to start to tip the scales in favor of whatever that new habit and behavior is. And you're not going to succeed 7 days a week, but you just slowly start to tip the scales. But as far as like the food addiction picture goes, I mean, absolutely, it's there. I think it's visible sometimes, and sometimes it isn't. But for these people, essentially, I it's hard to say. I think it's what's going to activate the brain the most to create that addictive pathways is likely sugar. And so I think when there's a full-blown food addiction, there's likely a sugar picture in there as well. And there's some interesting stuff being said these days, like It lights up similar pathways as cocaine usage. You know, obviously not like you're not going to spike the neurotransmitters to the same level or anything. But you kind of see the same pathway, like the same brain centers kind of being activated, similar neurochemicals being released from the same brain centers that it would be released if you were, you know, doing a hard drug or something like that. So the pathway is so the reward pathway is similar. But then also the addiction cycle pathway is very similar too. It's essentially you're getting some sort of a response from the food, from the sugar, from the relief. You're getting a spike in dopamine, serotonin. Who knows what else? Maybe even oxytocin. That's kind of supposed to be your closeness. Maybe even adrenaline if you're getting excited and you're binging on something. You know, like at the end of the day. So and then of course you feel bad about it. There's a low point. There's a guilt cycle. And then how do you make yourself feel good again? What was the last thing you did to make yourself feel good? And that's how the addiction continues, right? So, and stress is something that, so people use drugs and alcohol and food and gambling and compulsive shopping and all that stuff. They can use it to alleviate something. And so trying to alleviate stress can set the stage for addiction.
I was going to say a lot of people, I think addiction and habits can become they look very similar to people. They feel similar to people. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I with the difference being, so the negative consequences, for sure. There's some sort of a habituation where it takes you more of X to get you high or whatever you need, you're trying to get off of it.
The reason that I say it in that way is because you hear people say like, oh, I have a smoking habit. Well, why do you smoke? Well, I smoke like when I'm stressed, right? And like people, like that's like the language that seems to be like around like certain
I see
addictions.
What you're saying.
I don't think a lot of people
so they're
say
saying
like,
habit. Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people say like I have a heroin habit, right? I don't think like to that extent, but I do think
I hear it called habit as well.
And you also hear people say like, oh, I'm just so addicted to watching this show.
Yeah.
Are you really addicted to watching that show, or is it a habit that you've built into your routine? Like that's where I don't try and like take I don't know how to really say it, but it's not like taking credit away from like addiction or the severity away from like addiction or anything like that. But I think a lot of people feel it in a similar way, where they feel like when they are on when they have this habit that's being built, it feels like an addiction to them. It feels like they're like, I'm losing this battle and I can't get off. Right.
Oh, okay. I see. So when you're building a new, almost like a bad habit, like
trying to break a bad habit, I think sometimes it feels like an addiction for people because it becomes like, oh, I keep trying and I just can't do this. So then they think like, well, I'm just addicted to food. Well, maybe not. Maybe there's something that we can do here. I mean, obviously there's things you can do with addiction as well, but maybe looking at that, it's like, well, maybe, change your language. Maybe, you're not addicted to eating that food. Maybe there is a method that we can do. Maybe we can look at this and figure out, okay, how do we change this habit? And a big way to do that oftentimes is to look at the stress and managing stress better.
Well, yeah, because that can be a trigger, right? Stress can be a trigger, and then if you engage in that bad habit, it can create guilt, and then to alleviate the guilt, you want to engage in that bad habit again because it gives you temporary relief. That's what these things are all about. That's why we get caught up in these things, right?
Yeah, we do things based off of either like feelings of pleasure or feelings of pain. Right? Like that's really where we make
when you boil it down.
Yeah, when you boil it down, it's like you're either doing something because it feels good, or you're not doing something because it's going to cause you pain. Right? And oftentimes when we're stuck in these cycles of bad habits, it's, something feels bad. So we do something that temporarily makes us feel good, and that's why we're doing it, but then we feel bad about it again, like afterwards.
And it doesn't last because it is temporary by nature.
Yeah, it's an endorphin spike in your brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so these things they can get very tricky, but you're right. somebody like it is, we jump to that word, I've just got an addiction. And I think I know what you're saying, because too, then if you say it, it's almost like you just marginalize the whole thing and you're just like, what can I do? Whatever.
And people say like, I'm addicted to chips, right? Are you really addicted to chips? Or like, I don't like,
Mm-hmm.
I think and I like what you just said too, because I do think people will sometimes like joke about that, and as a way to like almost deflect that, the way that they're feeling about it, which is that they really are actually like pretty upset at themselves for not being able to break that habit.
Yeah, and this is where it takes kind of a skilled listener to listen to somebody saying this and read between the lines a little bit, because it can kind of be it can be a subtle call for help as well. So if for listeners out there, if you hear a family member or friend kind of say that, sure, play it off the first time, but bank it in your mind just quickly, because it could have been a subtle call for help as well.
Yeah, especially if it's, I mean, not to take anything away from food, but, especially if you're hearing them say something like that about, alcohol or anything else like that, like it is a serious thing to just pay attention to, be aware of it. You don't have to have an intervention with them like right there and be like, we need to have a chip intervention here. Mm-hmm. No, but maybe like you said, that person is actually looking for some level of support in some way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and one more note on stress eating, because just kind of interesting what happens in the body. So when you do eat, we have our fight or flight, we have our rest and digest. So when you do eat, you're almost forcing your body into digestion, into that rest and digest state, which can take you out of stressful state temporarily, which is why people stress eat in the first place. I just think that's kind of cool. Yeah. It's like the body's going, turn off the fight or flight somehow. And if you can't always do it with meditation, with your thoughts, with other techniques that you have, you can almost just press the button with food and it almost forces it into that. It doesn't always work though, because sometimes you're so stressed out you can't even digest. But this is one of the reasons why stress eating is even a thing.
Yeah. And I think, kind of building off that as well, it's important for people to understand too, because this is something that as I learned about it, like it was mind-blowing and fascinating to me, is like the amount of like nerves, like the nervous system that's in your gut.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
the enteric nervous system.
Yeah, like it's
our second brain, some say.
Yeah, and it's that for a reason, because like am I correct? I know I read this somewhere, but there's more nerves in your stomach than there are in your actual like around your brain.
I would believe it. Yeah, it's not only is it's just so complex. There's a whole like immune, like almost like immune system in there as well with I won't get into it. It's like its own
system, right?
Yeah. So there's just an unbelievably complex innervation of the stomach. There's complex immunity in there, not to mention digestion and everything else. So because there's so many nerves in the stomach, this is why your digestion is affected so much, because of stress. So there's like the big long nerve that runs from the brain and it touches every major organ in the body. It's called the vagus nerve. And so when people are like talking about, is there a mind-gut connection? Is that really real? It's like, yes, it's right here. It goes from the from the brainstem all the way, and it goes to the stomach, and that nerve carries with it fight or flight fibers and rest and digest fibers. So if those fight or flight fibers are hitting your stomach constantly, that's going to turn off digestion. And it's going to throw, let me just say, it's going to throw things into disarray, which is why you have like people won't eat for 20 hours and then they'll binge, and it's just, so that's the type of stuff that happens. Yeah.
And it's why you feel like shit when you're stressed.
Exactly.
Like really, like
you need to eat and you need to sleep.
Like people who are stressed, let's say with the pandemic, right? There's definitely somebody is listening to this right now or watching this right now that has been under high levels of stress throughout the last 2 years.
Yes.
Right? And so
if we have a human being watching this.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, please watch. But like anybody who has been dealing with that, I guarantee that you have noticed something in your stomach, in your guts, that has been off when you felt stressed. Mm-hmm. We felt it in competitions, in martial arts, right? It's like as you're getting ready, you get those butterflies in your stomach. That's not a coincidence that you feel like there's no coincidence. It's because you are so, like, stress is so highly intertwined. Your nervous system is so intertwined with your digestive system that there's a reason why people do this. There's a reason why people, have like struggle with bowel movements and stuff when they're highly stressed out and those types of things. And that's an important thing to recognize, because then people sometimes think like, well, something's wrong with me. When you can make that connection of, okay, if I can, again, go back to the basics here, start managing my stress a little bit more, it's amazing how that digestive system starts to kind of correct itself a little bit. And then not only that, but then that also impacts your ability to soak up nutrients
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point.
Right? Like people who are doing seemingly everything right with their diet, people who are, I'm eating all kinds of vegetables, I increased my fiber, I did this and that, nothing's happening. What's going on? Well, what is your stress like? Because that's going to impact so many things that happen within that digestive system and just within your body and water retention and all those types of things too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point about nutrient breakdown too, because like we want to get into weight loss a little bit today too. So like, yeah, I mean, if you need those nutrients in order to do what they need to do in your body. And sometimes you're eating certain nutrients to help support metabolism. So that can come into it. Obviously, you need nutrients for energy. Like you need it for nearly every process in the brain to make neurotransmitters. But stress and weight loss are intimately connected. And the reason for that is it is cortisol over time. It will start to cortisol receptors will start to express themselves in different places on the body, particularly fat cells. So like around the midsection of men as we age and hips of women. We all kind of know this stuff, but it really can impact if you're trying to lose weight. I think probably trying to lose weight, it is really going to impact it long term. And like we were talking earlier about, these big life events that can happen years earlier, just ask yourself, could that still be affecting me? Because I find that sometimes it is, and stress and cortisol still high. Like I can test for that stuff. We can do salivary cortisol tests, and so we can test for this where we take like a sample. I think it's four samples over a 24-hour period. So people are literally like setting an alarm at 3 a.m. to give a sample and things like that. But it's the best way to really map out a cortisol curve, so we can see if cortisol is high in the saliva, even if you don't think it is. And that's really cool. And I found that it is high with people, even if they don't think it is. And so then you can start to address that. Yeah.
Well, and like we mentioned earlier, we do a good job of kind of getting used to living with certain things. Like we do a good job of like, okay, like this level of stress is normal for me now. It's not a problem. Well, your body might think differently.
And that's what Gabor Mate was saying. It's not a problem until 10, 20 years down the line when suddenly you develop a mysterious autoimmune condition.
Yep.
Right? And to further his theory a little bit, he was seeing patterns in types of stresses on people and how it was manifesting in various illnesses later down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book's called When the Body Says No. It gets a little repetitive because he kind of just goes through case by case by case by case. By like 3/4 the way you get it, but very, very powerful book. I had a lot. I actually read it in paperback. I took a lot away from it.
Yeah, and we don't say that as a scare tactic for anybody to say like this is us speaking on just knowledge that we have as a way to hopefully motivate you to just like take another look at your stress and to understand the importance of managing it, right? It's not to say like if you don't manage your stress today, like you're going to have an autoimmune disease down the line, but it is a possibility that if we're neglecting our stress, if we're just telling ourselves like, oh, I can deal with it, I can manage it, right? Like reflect and say like, well, how am I actually managing it right now? Am I doing a good job? Is it affecting the way that I'm eating? Is it affecting my stomach? Like how often does my stomach hurt?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like those types of things.
Yeah. ask yourself if you're managing it in a healthy way. The answer is probably going to be no, and you're probably going to smile about it. But then ask yourself if now is a good time to start making some changes. Because, once you kind of admit that to yourself, and we've all been there, it's like, no, I haven't been dealing with this very well. I've been eating like crap. I haven't been exercising. I've been sleeping 12 hours a day, and I still wake up unrefreshed, like all that kind of stuff. So I think it's probably a really good time to start to talk about how we talk about manage your stress a lot.
Yeah.
It would be prudent of us to try to give some advice on to how to manage and mitigate stress as well, because we talked about what it is, we talked about what it can do to the body. Now, what the heck can we do about it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we skimmed on what it actually does to the body, right? Like you said, there's a lot of things that are very like intertwined, and that's where when you're looking at like, okay, how do I manage it? Yeah. I think the most important thing is, first of all, if you're struggling with managing it, get help from somebody, whether that's like reaching out to a friend that can help you that you can talk things over, or hiring somebody like Dr. Riley or myself who can talk those things through and who have experience like directly dealing with maybe the problems that are arising from that stress. Mm-hmm. But I think that the most important thing for anybody who's listening, who is dealing with stress and who does want to start to manage that stress, is understanding where to start, right? And we talked at the beginning about how like stress is stress on your body. And for me, and I'll ask you afterwards kind of how you like to approach this with your patients. But for me, when I'm working with clients, I like to look at, okay, like where is the most stress coming from, right? Like, as we said, like most people will recognize it themselves as this is physical stress or this is emotional stress. And, the example of like a construction worker who's very, very physical all day long, but feeling really stressed out about certain things. Their friend might tell them like, hey, I started working out 4 days a week and my stress like disappeared. Right. Well, for that construction worker who has all this like stress that's on their body throughout the day, right? That might not be the best place for that person to start adding more stress physically onto their body.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. You're overlaying fire with fire. And by fire, I mean like an activity that requires a lot of energy already, which for some people, if you have the opposite, if you're sitting behind a desk like for most of the day, then you need to find balance through activity. But if you're already very active throughout the week, you have to find balance through rest. So this is the concept of the yin and yang type activities. So when I learned about this in Asian medicine from my professor, they basically said that yang is what they would call the masculine energy. It's active, it's out there doing its thing, and then yin is the feminine energy, where it's more restorative and healing. And you need both. You can't just sit around and restore yourself all day long. Your joints are actually going to start hurting. Like your muscles are going to atrophy. It's going to cause depression. You can't just rest and restore all day long. And you can't just be running on empty on your gas tank and what I call redlining the meter, the tach meter, right? You can't do that constantly either. So something that I coach my patients on is to, exactly like you said, because I used to do this too, and my doctor once said, you're doing all. They're like, how do you relieve stress? And I was like, I go to kickboxing and do this and get it out. But it's like when we looked at my week, it was all yang activities. There was no restorative. So now, having learned that lesson myself, I that's what I coach my patients on too. It's okay. Let's look at your week. Yes, you do some really great things, but it's like you're pushing it hard at work. You're pushing it hard on the workouts. You're pushing it hard here. It's like all you're doing is just pushing.
Yeah. Absolutely, right. And you, like a good example is somebody who like works at a desk all day, right? Like they're sitting at their desk, they're pretty much there all day long. Especially now, most people are working from home still, depending on where you're living. But how simply just like getting up and going for a walk can completely change somebody's like mindset and like just the way that they look at that day and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like that's a prime example of trying to create that balance throughout your day. Because I could tell you, like doing a lot of virtual personal training and stuff through like a lot of months, like even I started to notice like joints and stuff, like my knees, my hips and stuff started to have pain, like old shoulder injury, like that pain started to come back again just from sitting all day, right? Because now the balance was like super on one side, and I needed to find that balance again. It's like, get out, go for evening walks, like do what you can, get moving, stand up and move around while you're working with a client, even if it's over the computer, like those types of things, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I think for most for most people that I work with, anyways, it's interesting because it's actually finding more yin, that feminine restorative healing activities throughout the week.
Yeah, we're going through like it. There's been an interesting shift, right? Where now it's hard to get people to rest. Whereas like before it was like everybody's like, oh, you got to get motivated, get moving, right? And now it's like, no, like you got to recover, take your time, rest, right? We've kind of shifted over time from this this mindset, especially in terms of fitness, where people are just like go go go. Nobody wants to rest, right? Like I'll tell a client like today we're just gonna stretch. Right. And they're like, well, no, I need to make progress. Like, this is how you make progress. You have to we have to take that time. We have to build that recovery into your program so that you can actually see progress. Otherwise, like you said, the stress that's constantly being placed on your body is going to actually start to deteriorate your body. You have to give yourself time to recover both physically and emotionally, because remember, stress is stress. Right. So if you're constantly dealing with stressful situations throughout the day, you go from work to kids to, spouse to family situations, like you're constantly dealing
worry with while you're trying to go to sleep.
Yeah. And then you're not sleeping like now. And then you wake up, you do the same thing the next day over and over and over again. Well, stress is stress on your body. That's the same thing as working out nonstop and not taking any recovery. You need to find emotional recovery too. Right. So that might mean taking, your lunch hour today and actually just like sitting alone, listening to some music over your lunch hour. Maybe is going for a walk in the evening instead of going straight to the couch to watch TV. Like, to find ways to bring some of that recovery, and maybe that means meditating. Like, there's a lot of different things you can do to do that, but like you said, it's about finding that balance. It's not about going, okay, no more working out because it's clearly causing too much stress on my body. Well, no, that workout is probably beneficial for you still too, but you need to find a balance, and that's what it really comes down to.
Yep, exactly. And that's sometimes you need to talk to somebody to even start that exercise of kind of taking an honest look at your week and where you're expending your energy in the obvious ways, and then where you're spending it in the less obvious ways, right? And then like, so that is something that we do have training with myself. So we start with health psychology, like year 1, and it continues through to 4th year. And it's a staple in my practice. I find some of the biggest changes, they're not coming from a supplement I give somebody, or, it's from giving someone a space and a platform to express some of these concerns. And then I get to reflect back on them, and we get to work it out and see what kind of a conclusion we can come up with. Sometimes it's immediate, and sometimes it takes months to come up with that. But that is just something that we have to do as human beings, to work through things. Like, you have to do it. You have to talk. You have to be open and honest. And it's not easy for some people, but I also appreciate that for some people, it comes a lot easier because they've just been waiting for an opportunity for so long. Yeah. And then it's just like the faucet's on, and the entire time especially the first few visits, I hardly say anything. I
was going to say, a lot of like the most revolutionary sessions that I've had with people is like, I've asked like 3 questions that are just like questions that dig in the right direction, right? Where it's like, you ask one question and they tell you a little bit, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And then they do, and then they start uncovering all these things, and they start, talking about things that they didn't even realize was bothering them, but it is. And then you check in the next week. Well, how did this week go? Oh, it's better. I don't know what I did. Like, I don't know what was different, but it was better. It's like, yeah, well, it's because you started to, explore these things and uncover these things again. And not to say that like, in order to lose weight, like you have to like have counseling or therapy or something like that, but you have to be willing to reflect. And you do sometimes, if you are struggling, you have to be willing to be vulnerable, because if you're not willing to be vulnerable, then like it's really, really difficult to find change.
Yeah, and vulnerability can almost be exciting. It can offer so much relief.
It's not a bad thing.
It's like,
by any means.
and if you think about if you've ever been in a situation either where you're living with someone long term or you're in a long term relationship, even with an intimate partner, or even with like a boss at work, it's like you just get to these moments through your relationship where you have to hash things out. You like have to talk about these really difficult things.
Yep.
And then what's on the other side of it? It's I mean, if you did your job right, it's like relief and compromise and resolution, and like all of these treasures come after that. And that's just part of being vulnerable with another person, but also being vulnerable with someone like Kyle and myself, right? When you're trying to get to the crux of your issues.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't like what comes up. Like sometimes you don't like what comes from that conversation. Like maybe you have a realization of something, like, if we're going to go super extreme, it's like maybe there's a realization of like, I need to quit my job because it's just not working anymore. Well, that's a pretty difficult thing now to deal with. And I think that's what a lot of people fear when it comes to being vulnerable, is like that there's going to be difficult change that comes from that. Whereas like, well, if I just stay with status quo, at least I'm surviving right now. Right. But people don't, I shouldn't say people don't want to, but like a lot of people do struggle with that vulnerability, I think based off of some fear. But like you said, the best things in life come on the other side of fear and vulnerability and those types of things. Even if it was a relationship that maybe you like had a conversation, it didn't go well, your partner decided they're going to leave you because they don't like what you're saying or something. Maybe that's a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So often it is.
Like maybe that is the thing that really decreases stress in your life that you really need, right? Maybe not, but maybe it is. And
then you find that next person that you were meant to be with the next time after you've learned a few more lessons and all that. Yeah.
And that's a conversation that, just relationships in general is something we can dive into in another episode as well, because that's a super dynamic, complex thing as well.
Yep.
But anything else that you wanted to cover just in terms of like managing stress?
Yeah. The one caveat that I want to end with here when you're managing stress is that I find when I get started with patients, they're motivated right out the gate and they want to cover so many what I call spheres of life, so many different dimensions of life all at once. So they want to tackle their finances, they want to tackle their personal health, they want to tackle their relationship, they want to tackle their spiritual growth, like all, and they just want to go for it. They want to tackle their weight loss. And it's like, what I tell people is that's gonna create more stress. I swear to you. If you try to change 5 dimensions of your life at the same time, you're going to fail. You're gonna feel guilty. You're gonna have more stress. So this is why working with someone is very important. Some people can figure it out, but it's risky to go at it alone. So then what I would do is I would tell my patient, well, let's look at, you want to fix 4 different things in your life. We have to prioritize and go at one. Sometimes they overlap. Sometimes you can go for 2. Sometimes you can go for 2 at the same time. But don't go for 4. Don't even go for 3. You really have to zero in on what are you going to focus on first. So that's the last thing I think I want to say about that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because it's the same way I approach people like creating habits in their life, and whether that's in terms of fitness, nutrition, or stress. Right? It's like start with one thing. Like start with one simple thing, and like you can start with something very, very small. It's something that seems very minimal, but then you can always you're going to build off of that thing. And what I notice with people is that one small thing often has a trickle effect on the rest of their life. And an example that I'll give that doesn't have a lot to do with stress is like somebody who maybe says like, I'm just going to start drinking more water, because that seems like something that is achievable for them at that time. Well, all of a sudden they start drinking more water, they start feeling good about that habit, and then they start to recognize, and I've seen this time and time again, now all of a sudden they're eating more vegetables too, and that wasn't even the thing that they were trying to do, right? But it's because like drinking more water either made them snack less maybe, or maybe just that small win that they had kind of built towards something else. You can do the same thing when it comes to managing your stress. Start with one thing. I'm going to go for one 10-minute walk at my lunch hour and just get outside. Right? You will be amazed at the trickle effect that can have in other areas of your life. Oh, I got outside, I had clarity, I didn't snap at my kids today. oh, that's kind of cool. Since I didn't snap at my kids, I actually slept better, right? And then, you know, these things do build, and you don't, like you said, like, you don't have to look at it as like, I have to attack this and this and this and this and this. It's like, no, start with this, and let's see where that takes us first. Like,
That's right.
Start having success in one small area first, and then watch it build.
And I've seen the trickle down effect as well. So yeah, that's right. Start with one high value area that might have overlapping benefits, and kind of go from there. But yeah, that's, you know, it does take a little. You have to work that out.
Yeah,
you have to work that out.
Yeah, totally. So a little recap here. So, you know, first thing, you know, recognize what is stress, right? Stress can be a lot of different things. We have the kind of this perceived physical stress, perceived emotional stress, but really when you come down to it, stress is stress. And that's an important thing to understand, because when we're looking at like how stress affects our body, it's going to affect it in a number of different ways, right?
Absolutely, because yeah, like I said, cortisol and adrenaline circulates through the body, and it wreaks havoc over time.
Not to mention your digestive system, like all of these things are so intertwined that when you look at it of like physical or emotional, no, look at it as just like stress in general. And then when you look at like where you're feeling that stress coming from, whether it's physical or emotional, you can look at like where's a good starting point maybe for you to start managing that stress, right?
Yep. And we talked about ways to manage it. So, you know, really getting to the root cause is very important, talking it out. There is finding that balance between the yin and the yang types of activities throughout your week. I know you were talking about maybe one more on alleviating it. But I think that was the bulk of it anyways.
Yeah, and I think like the real takeaway here for anybody listening is, you know, decide to
putting good habits into place.
Putting good habits into place. You're right.
That's what it was.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was just going now is like, you know, decide to reflect first of all. This is kind of like a common theme that we've been talking about is like you have to be willing to reflect. So stop, reflect. How am I actually doing with my stress management? How is it actually affecting me on my day-to-day living? Mm-hmm. If you don't like what you're seeing, or if you see that there's room for improvement, then take a look at what can I do? What is one small thing that I can start with right now? Or maybe it is a bigger thing, like reaching out to somebody like Dr. Riley or myself to get help in that area. Maybe that is something that you do. But if it's not, then at least start with one small thing. Pick one small habit, one thing where it's, you know, maybe I'm going to take a 10-minute walk outside by myself. Maybe I'm going to get this me time. Maybe I'm going to, you know, start to meditate once a week, or whatever that looks like for you that seems achievable, that you know you can do, and start with that and then start to build off of that over weeks and months.
That's right. And if you still can't, let us know.
Let us know. That's right. We're happy to help. Reach out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We really appreciate you being with us, and we appreciate your support. Without you, it's just you and I talking in a room. So,
which is okay too. I mean, we had some fun today. The 1 minute that's gonna create some good.
We'll have to play that again sometime soon.
Yeah, that'll create some good clips. But
okay, take it easy, everyone.
Yep. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you all next week for episode 5.
All right. Thank you.